Opinion, Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Good evening, it's 6 o'clock. This is Dewbs & Co, and I'm Dawn Neeson, in for the lovely Michelle Dewberry herself. Is the civil service out of control? New research from the Institute for Government shows Whitehall grade inflation is costing the taxpayer, that's us, a whopping £1.5 billion a year, with over-promoted, underqualified civil servants landing senior jobs that they mostly do from home. So, does Whitehall need a clear out? And as it's revealed that Tony Blair considered sending asylum seekers to Africa back in 2004 when he was Prime Minister, is Labour's opposition to the government's Rwanda plan a teeny-weeny bit hypocritical? Conservative MP James Daly has sparked supposed outrage for claiming, I'm going to say this word once, forgive me if you find it offensive, but this is a direct quote, claiming crap parents are to blame for struggling children. But is he right? And is it time for parents to take more responsibility for their own kids? Finally, as 2023 draws to a close, we're asking you, are New Year's resolutions bad for us? Can they put too much pressure on people? That's all to come in the next hour, but first, the latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thank you, Dawn. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Poland says Russian missile is likely to have entered its airspace. According to the head of the Polish armed forces, both Poland and NATO's radar systems spotted an unidentified aerial object over the country's territory. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says the military alliance stands in solidarity with Poland and that it remains vigilant. It's understood groups of soldiers are performing on-the-ground verification of the missile's flight path. Here in the UK, the government has promised to send around 200 air defence missiles to Ukraine after Russia launched a massive air attack overnight. It comes as Rishi Sunak condemned the Russian president for the latest bombardment, saying Putin will stop at nothing to eradicate freedom and democracy. Officials say 31 civilians have been killed and at least 120 injured, following a series of attacks on critical infrastructure and military facilities. Ukraine says 27 drones and 87 cruise missiles were intercepted in the biggest bombardment since the war began. One person has died in Scotland following an outbreak of E. coli. It's after the UK Health Security Agency confirmed it's currently investigating 30 cases across England and Scotland to identify any potential links to a brand of cheese. The Food Standards Agency has announced a precautionary recall of 4 products from Mrs. Kirkham's Lancashire cheese because of possible E. coli contamination. The family of a man who was killed while trying to save a stranger in Sheffield says the tragic circumstances show the sort of man that he was. Chris Marriott went to the aid of an unconscious woman when he was hit by a car which had ploughed into a crowd of people on Wednesday. He's in a life-threatening condition in hospital. A 23-year-old man arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder remains in custody, while a 55-year-old has been released on bail. Witness Tarek Naili says people were fighting in the street beforehand.
I found a lot of people gathering around and screaming, and a car crashed into the sign next door, and a lot of fighting over there. I think 6-7 people fighting each other opposite side, And there is one guy in his 20s. His face is full of blood, and one woman lying down beside.
A British woman and her son have died after an avalanche swept through the French Alps. The 54-year-old and her 22-year-old son were skiing with family on Mont Blanc when the disaster occurred. A search and rescue mission involving around 20 emergency workers lasted 5 hours. Authorities say another person, believed to be an instructor, escaped with minor injuries. The Foreign Office says it's supporting the family of those who died. The UK could feel close to freezing as the clock strikes midnight on New Year's Eve, with forecasters warning of 75-mile-an-hour winds across parts of England and Wales. Meanwhile, around 100 homes in Greater Manchester are still dealing with the aftermath of a suspected tornado. More yellow weather alerts have been issued from 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. Weather journalist Nathan Rao says the challenging conditions are set to continue into 2024.
Now, the UK Met Office has said that the Irish Met Office, Met Éireann, might name this storm on Saturday as Storm Henk because it's coming in a deep low-pressure system from the west across Ireland first, which will take the brunt of the winds, and then into the United Kingdom, where there'll be rain and some significant hill snow in Scotland, because as that storm comes in and bumps up against cold air, that is going to bring some hill snow. So up there where they've had heavy snow from Storm Gerrit already, it's something to watch.
A couple have been arrested after spreading fake blood across the gates of Downing Street. The man and woman threw the paint in protest, demanding a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. They said the government had blood on its hands after refusing to demand Israel end its bombing of Gaza, calling it a massacre of biblical proportions. Both suspects are now in custody. And Jack Grealish is expected to play for Manchester City tomorrow after burglars raided the home of the England midfielder. £1 million worth of jewellery and watches are said to have been stolen while he was playing for Manchester City against Everton. The footballer's family and fiancé were reportedly in the house at the time, but nobody was harmed. No arrests have been made. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Dawn.
Thank you, Sophia. Welcome to Dewbs & Co with me, Dawn Neeson. Now, joining me until 7 is my brilliant panel tonight. We have politics professor and pollster Matt Goodwin and trade unionist and broadcaster Paul Embry. Thank you very much for joining me, gentlemen, at this
Pleasure.
weird time of year where no one really knows what they're doing, is it?
No, what day is it today? You've got 3 seconds.
It's still Merry Christmas, isn't it? Because it's the 12 days of Christmas, so we can say that still.
Until January the 5th?
Yeah. I still have no idea what actual day it is, though. Does anyone know at this time of year what day it is?
Yeah, Monday.
Don't frighten me. It's definitely not a Monday. Any case, you can get in touch with us, everything we're talking about today, by emailing gbviews@gbnews.com or, very simple, on Twitter @gbnews. Now, get straight onto it, shall we? A new report from the Institute for Government says civil servants are being over-promoted to get round a Whitehall pay squeeze. Grade inflation in Whitehall is costing £1.5 billion a year. That's your money, by the way, taxpayers' money, and resulting in less qualified staff doing senior jobs. The think tank also warns that top officials who cannot be promoted because of the pay squeeze are experiencing much bigger pay cuts, driving the talented people to the private sector. The think tank warns that this is going to be a disaster for the civil service and a disaster for us. But the question tonight is the civil service completely out of control? Do the government need to get a handle on it? And who the hell is running the country? Civil servants or the government? I'm going to come to you first on this one, Matt. What has gone wrong with the civil service? All we seem to hear is that they're not doing their jobs, they're working from home.
A lot of things,
What's happening?
basically. I think there's a lot of things going wrong with the civil service. It's not been a great year for the people that effectively run the British state. We've had, pretty clear signs of political bias in the civil service. We've now got reports that underqualified people are being over-promoted, and we've got another piece of evidence in this report that even the really qualified, highly talented people are often leaving for the private sector because they're not getting paid enough. I would add to that also, we've got this working from home issue. I was in a let's just say, civil service department recently. I won't tell you which one. And I was struck walking around the floors of this office building in early December because nobody was there. Nobody at all was there because everybody was working from home. And I think what all of this is mounting up to is a bit of a crisis for the civil service. A perception out there, many of your viewers may share this, that public institutions in this country aren't quite working the way they should. They're too political, they're not productive enough, they haven't got the right people in place. This, of course, was always Dominic Cummings' argument, that actually, if you want to fix the big issues like immigration, if you want to fix the big issues like Brexit, you've got to get the organs of the state working in a much more effective way, and clearly that's not happening as of yet.
The clue should be in the word service, shouldn't it, Paul? I mean, half of them are still working from home. These are the latest statistics. 73% would rather it stay that way, and 40% of them would rather resign rather than going back to the office.
Well, I'm not a particular fan of the modern civil service, but there's no doubt that many of them have suffered real terms pay cuts. Even junior civil servants have suffered something like 12% real terms pay cuts since 2010, 23% the further you go up the ladder. And people get angry about that. They're sick of being promised jam tomorrow. And at the end of the day, if you force down people's pay, then you're going to have a low morale service. And you're going to have a service that isn't as effective as it ought to be. That doesn't mean to say there isn't some implicit bias within the service. I certainly think there is. I think we've got an activist civil service now, and they've always kind of resisted any serious challenge to the status quo, even going back to the 1970s when you had Tony Benn as a radical Labour minister wrote in his diaries about how he was constantly blocked from by the civil service from implementing the sort of radical policies that he wanted to implement. So I do think there's a separate issue about bias and about the fact that it's a cornerstone of democracy that we are supposed to have an impartial civil service. And you look at the way the civil service kind of acted around some of the stuff with Priti Patel and Dominic Raab, and they were kind of instrumental.
They were deliberately put in blocks in the way.
There's no question that some civil servants were instrumental in whipping up some of that stuff. And it seems that if there's a particular policy or minister that isn't in keeping and whose views are not in keeping with the majority kind of civil servant view, and of course they have their own politics. We're told they don't have their own politics or they keep their politics private, but actually they all had their own politics. And if there's a policy or minister who isn't a favourite of the civil service, if it's the policy, they'll try whatever way they can to try to block it. If it's the minister, they'll do what they did to Patel and Raab. So we do need to look at that, and I do think we need to think hard about whether we do still have an independent civil service. But nonetheless, there is the wage issue, and if you want the best people, and if you don't want people to be over promoted, you do need to make sure you pay people properly. And the real terms pay cut, I think, has had a real serious impact in that regard.
But this latest the grade inflation thing is basically just massaging the figures, because if the pay rises had been given in line with the private sector, the bill would be pretty much the same. So, I mean, it's like we should have just given them the pay rises rather than this massaging things by promoting them so they get a higher grade, but they're not good enough for the job. And that's the problem here. Now, the thing is, so we feel sorry for them, and a lot of them would say they do a very hard job. They're working very hard. A lot of them are on fairly low wages. I mean, we think of the sort of people living in the home counties on loads of money, but I mean, the average civil servant is on £27,000 a year. Not a lot of money, is it? And we have been starting calling them the blob as well. So should we start feeling a little bit sorry for them here? Are we being a bit too hard on them?
I think the civil servants overall do a really good job. I think, the average wage is lower than the median wage in this country. I know lots of civil servants. They're really good people. They're trying to make the country a better place. But it's also true at the same time that too often, as Paul says, we have seen the civil service become quite activist in politics. I mean, just think of some of the more prominent examples this year. Looking back on 2023, we had the head of a very senior civil servant coming out saying that he was a Remainer. He felt that he needed to project his views on Brexit to his staff. We then had civil servants threatening to strike over the Rwanda policy. Now, whatever you think about Rwanda, if you think it's a good idea, you think it's a bad idea, we'll come on and talk about it later on. The fact is it's being put forward by a democratically elected government. So the job of the civil service is to implement policies that are brought forward by the government of the day, not to intervene in a politically biased way. So we had that. We also had them intervene over a lot of issues, not just to do with Dominic Raab and Priti Patel. We also had them leaking information, tweeting around Dominic Cummings and the government. And in a way, I think what makes me sad about the civil service is, you know, they used to say it's a Rolls-Royce institution within British government. It seems to have undermined itself, actually. It seems to have weakened itself. And I think this isn't just about the civil service. In every major corporation in British political life today, and also in the private sector, I think we have new generations of workers who go into the office and they don't think they're there to do a job. I think they think they're there to change the world in some way, to try and project their private beliefs onto their role. And I think ultimately that needs to stop.
When did that start? How do we get to this place?
I think, well, Matt's written at length about this. I think, you know, many of our institutions are filled with people who subscribe to that woke ideology. I think probably, if you trace it right back, you could probably trace it back to the 60s when the universities chucked out thousands and thousands of people with a kind of progressive, almost revolutionary worldview. And those people came of age in the 80s and 90s and began to stamp their authority and their influence on public life and in our institutions. And many of those people are now the kind of leaders of our institution. They're very kind of hyper-liberal in their approach to politics. They have very little room for what you might call small c conservative values, which is, you know, it's still the kind of politics that runs through much of the working class in this country, including many, many thousands, millions of people who once upon a time considered themselves Labour voters. And the kind of people who lead our public institutions and much of our media and much of our politics, I think, are very disconnected from that view. And it's because of that disconnect, that chasm, I think, in the world views of ordinary voters on the one hand and the leaders of our institutions, the political and media class on the other, that we did end up with things like Brexit, and we ended up with the 2019 election where many people in the Red Wall voted for the first time Conservative. But there's no doubt that I think many working class people look at our institutions and think, you don't speak for me and you don't understand me.
That's the problem, isn't it? Now, Sunak did announce last month that all civil servants needed to be back in the office 60% of the time. Only 11 of the 19 departments have actually listened to him. I think that's a clear hint there. Who is actually running the country? And it's all very well them saying low morale, low wages, etc. But there's lots of people out there waiting for their driving licence, waiting for their passports, trying to get through to Revenue and Customs at the moment, and the tax office is almost impossible. 3 hours for some of us. It's, yeah, who's running the country? I don't think it's the government at this precise moment in time. Right, OK, we move on. Coming up, as it emerges, Tony Blair considered sending asylum seekers to, oh yeah, Africa. When he was Prime Minister, we'll be asking, is Labour's opposition for Rwanda plan just a teeny bit hypocritical?
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel. Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. This is Dewbs & Co with me, Dawn Neeson, and keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight is my wonderful panel, and that is Paul and Matt. Now, files released today that were formerly top secret show Tony Blair considered radical solutions to solve the issue of illegal migration when he was Prime Minister. A detention camp on the Isle of Mull and breaking international law were among measures on migration presented to the former Prime Minister. He even considered a nuclear option of removing migrants to safe havens in third-party countries such as Turkey, South Africa and Kenya. Given Blair is said to be close to Keir Starmer, pulling the strings, some would say, is Labour's opposition to the Rwanda plan just a tad hypocritical? Coming to you first on this one, Paul. It is hypocritical, surely. I mean,
it is.
They've done everything they can to stop the Rwanda plan and slated at every opportunity. They were doing it in 2022, 23, 24. Their idea.
It shows how much the axis has shifted on the left, that actually once upon a time many people on the left, including Blair himself clearly, although he had a very liberal approach to immigration generally, understood that control of the labour supply and controlling immigration generally, having some control over it at least, was important because the labour supply is a market dynamic, which, like all market dynamics, needs to be regulated so as to allow government to plan around things like welfare and jobs and housing and so on. 20 years ago, as we can see from what's been revealed, that was not particularly a controversial position on the left. And in fact, if you go back to that time, it was the open borders position that was, if you like, more controversial and was more of a fringe position. You know, roll forward 20 years and that has turned full circle now. And actually, if from a position on the left, and I know this from personal experience, you argue in favour of control of the labour supply and strong borders and you oppose open borders, you are almost regarded as some sort of crank within the Labour movement or someone who's clearly a closet Tory or on the side of Nigel Farage or something like that.
Or even worse, a closet racist.
Well,
Let's
exactly.
say
and
that,
that gets thrown at those of us on the left who argue for regulation of the labour supply all the time. So, but what it does show absolutely is that there were people in the Labour movement at the senior levels of government who understood that you cannot have a situation where then as now you have thousands of mainly young men, because it is mainly young men, turning up on our shores and seeking asylum. Where they are genuine asylum seekers, of course they deserve to be treated as such, but many are economic refugees and we need to have an honest debate.
Have you seen the Ricky Gervais Armageddon clip went out on Netflix?
Yes.
Have you seen him getting taken to task on social media for making an observational comedy joke about mostly being young men on the boats, which is actually a fact, and he's being tasked as being a racist now. So, I mean...
But if you look at the actual official government data, over 80% of the people coming across on the small boats are mainly young men. The issue here is not only what we're living through, which is the radicalisation of the left, as Paul says, which is putting Labour increasingly at odds with where a lot of voters are on these issues. I say this on Twitter all the time, or X, most people in Britain want the boats to stop. They want the borders to be strengthened, and they want less immigration. What Tony Blair was discussing 20 years ago is what many European countries are discussing today, and what the National Crime Agency here in Britain has said is the only thing that would make a tangible difference to stopping the boats, which is a deterrent, a third country deterrent. Namely, if you come to Britain illegally, you will be sent to another country and you will have your claim processed in another country. Now, what's interesting is Rishi Sunak is pursuing that through the Rwanda vote, crunch vote in the new year. Now look at the Labour Party today. They're now saying they're not only going to repeal that Rwanda plan, but they're going to repeal the illegal migration bill, which Rishi Sunak brought in. And so under a likely Labour government at the next election, we're not only going to see legal migration increase, because Labour, to be frank, are pretty comfortable with legal migration, but their plan is on illegal migration is clearly not going to work. They're saying they're going to smash the gangs. But anybody who's actually worked on that issue knows that's like whack-a-mole. You get rid of one gang, there's another gang. So this is what worries me about where we're heading in 2024. Voters out there, your viewers, are saying, stop the boats. This isn't that difficult. Change international laws. Bring in new legislation. Have a third country deterrent. And we're heading into a Labour government where I suspect we'll see the number of small boats increase even more.
And yeah, obviously there is a human rights issue here. I mean, you know, the one thing everybody wants, whether you're on the left or the right or somewhere in between, is we want to stop people suffering at the hands of criminal smuggling gangs. That's what we want to do. No one, and this is a depressing thing about this story that's come out today, nobody in the last 20 years has got even close to touching that, to solving that problem.
And the problem is, Dawn, it's made the whole issue of immigration toxic in our politics and in our society again. We kind of moved on, I've said this many times, from the days of, you know, the National Front being on the march in the 1970s and, you know, standing people in elections and so on and marching through areas where there are larger numbers of ethnic minorities. And then we got to a position throughout the kind of 80s and 90s where people generally felt that the situation was under control, you know, the immigration was being managed properly, it was being regulated properly, numbers weren't terribly excessive. And then you really began to see the impact of EU free movement, and then with EU enlargement in 2004 with the Eastern European countries, that suddenly had rocket boosters put underneath it. And the thing just became completely badly managed and poorly regulated. And, you know, that's the sad thing, that it's not that people in this country have suddenly become, in my view, anti-immigration. It's not that they were ever anti-immigration. In my view, most people have always...
Racist.
Well,
another way of saying it, and that's what people say.
In my view, most people have always been pro-immigration. They simply want the numbers to be managed properly. They want the numbers to be modest. And if that were the case, and if we had, you know, decent integration policies, which we've been absolutely rubbish at, let's be honest about that, it wouldn't be the running story in our politics that it's become, and that's the real tragedy, I think.
Just pick you up on one thing. Maybe we disagree on this. I don't actually think integration policies are enough. I think what many people in this country want to see is just a lower overall level of migration. When Tony Blair came into office in 1997, net migration was 50,000. Net migration today is just short of 700,000. I mean, it's a completely different era. How can you integrate communities when you are exposing a country to that level of constant churn and change? And also, I would add, the migration that we are now witnessing through the small boats and also through legal migration is not like the migration of the last 20 years. It's not mainly coming from within Europe, within the European Union. Much of the migration today is coming from Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Afghanistan, outside of the European Union. It's not only more likely to be a net fiscal cost to Britain's economy, but it's also culturally much more distinctive from migration that we've had in the past. So the integration issue, I think many people out there are saying, what's happening to my community, what's happening to my country? The quick answer to that is, if you want to get a more integrated country, you have to run sustainable levels of migration. We have to bring net migration down, in my view, to around 100,000 a year so we can fully absorb the migration of the last 20 years while also changing our relationship with international laws so we can actually clamp down on illegal migration and the gangs that are pushing that into our country?
I accept it is a numbers game. I accept it is a numbers game because I think what incentive, and this is the question, what incentive is there on newcomers to integrate if the numbers are so large that actually, they think, well, there's loads of people coming with me and we're living in our own kind of communities, almost like ghettos within main cities.
But you can't even say that now, can you? Every time you have that conversation, it's like, well, yeah, people are integrating. It's like, no, if you live in certain parts, I live in East London. No, they're not.
I think we have to. Lots of people say we're a multicultural country. Actually, we don't have what you might term, in my view, genuine multiculturalism in this country. What we have are pockets of monocultures within individual towns and cities. And within those pockets of monoculture, in these places, people are living completely parallel lives.
Now, why is that? It's because the policy of multiculturalism prioritises minority group identities, cultures and traditions, and urges them to remain distinct from the wider community. This is where so many London commentators and columnists get it wrong. They think multiculturalism, well, if you critique multiculturalism, you're critiquing the wonder of diversity. Actually, people like me who say we have a problem with multiculturalism, what we're saying is the ism bit, the policy bit. We have a policy that basically prioritises minority groups over the majority and tells the majority that they can celebrate any identity except their own.
I think, unfortunately, gentlemen, we're running out of time. We could talk about this all night. And I believe you will be talking about this a bit later, will you, with Patrick Christie?
So Patrick Christie is launching some exclusive polling at 9 o'clock, which links directly into this immigration issue. So you want to tune into that.
That's definitely one to stay tuned for. But we have on this show, coming up, was Conservative MP James Daly right to blame bad parenting for struggling children? Don't go too far.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Welcome back. This is Dewbs & Co. with me, Dawn Neeson, keeping me company until 7 o'clock. Politics professor and pollster Matt Goodwin and trade unionist and broadcaster Paul Embry. Now, a reminder, we want to hear your thoughts as well. So get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.com or on Twitter/X @gbnews. Very simple. Some of you have been getting in touch already and some very interesting ones. Wendy, good evening, Wendy. On the civil service, says something I forgot to mention, so great point, Wendy. Many in the civil service receive an excellent pension package and many in the private sector do not receive this. Meanwhile, Tony says civil service should be put on performance-related pay. Let's see how quick they start doing their jobs from the office then. And meanwhile, just a quick one here on Blair and migration. Andy, good evening. Andy says, to discover Blair and his cronies are more right-wing than many current Tories is not exactly a revelation. Most of them are now either a baron, lord, sir or dame. They're about as close to socialists as I am to being a giraffe on roller skates. I think that's a good point. Well made. Thank you very much for that. Now, let's move on, shall we? Tory MP for Bury North, James Daly, has been criticised for saying children who struggle are the products of parents who, I'm going to say this word again, apologies if you're offended, but it's a direct quote from what he said, and I think it's important to say it, are the products of crap parents. He was talking up the policies put forward by New Conservatives, a group of backbench Conservative MPs led by Miriam Cates and Danny Kruger. The group have pushed a so-called family values message, with Cates urging the government to use tax and benefit system to encourage mothers and fathers to stay at home. So is James Daly right? Can we blame bad parenting for struggling children? Do parents need to start taking more responsibility? I'm going to come to you, Matt, on this one first. What is so wrong with saying that bad parenting produces bad children?
Well, I think the first thing to say is I generally support what the New Conservatives are about. They're trying to get a different debate going within the Conservative Party, and here they're trying to say we don't talk enough about family stability and the breakdown of family life. So I completely agree with that. I don't like the language. I think the fact that many families are now broken down, you know, separated, children being raised by single mums. I was raised by a single mum. I don't think that makes somebody a crap parent if their children then go on to suffer or to do less well than other kids in the education system or in professional life and whatever. Underlying this debate is a really important point, though, which is we as a country, as a society, have to get much better at talking about the role of family within our country, within our communities. We do actually, I think, need to be more like other countries that are not just thinking about how can we get mum and dad back to work as quickly as possible after having a child, but how can we provide a range of incentives and policies that help mum and dad and also encourage mum and dad to stay together and encourage them to have more children, because this is intimately linked to the demographic crisis that Britain is facing. To be blunt, we're not having enough children.
Absolutely.
So if you're complaining about mass migration, you should also be talking a lot about how to fix a demographic crisis. We need more children in this country. And Miriam Cates, to her credit, and Danny Kruger, who lead the New Conservatives, as far as I can see, have been the only frontline politicians who have been out there saying this is an issue we really need to push to the forefront of British politics.
I find it astonishing that we're talking about the family like it's a bad thing, like implying that, you know, if you are a parent and you choose to stay at home and look after your child, that is a bad thing. Surely you have a right to choose, and it's not about what. How do we get to this thing that's saying the family is bad? What is wrong with the family?
It's not, and it's very important not to lose sight of the importance of strong families. You know, every study shows the stronger the family, the more likely the child is to attain, you know, better things in his or her life, educational, career opportunities, and so on. Less likely to break the law, dabble with drugs, suffer from mental health issues. So that's really important, but also important to focus on the value of a strong society too. You know, make sure that when your kids grow up and you've brought them up well and they leave home, that actually they've got a good job to go into, that they've got a good, solid, well-paid job in a steady industry, that they can get on the housing ladder without having to pay extortionate rents or live in substandard housing, that they can afford their own home, that they can get an apprenticeship, that they can have a decent quality of life. I've campaigned on the left for I've argued for a family wage, where something where a family can survive on the wages of one earner, rather than both parents being forced to go out through reason of financial imperative to work. I mean, the buckets of abuse I got from my own people on the left for arguing. I mean, when you think about it, it's insane that someone on the left can say, actually, we need to increase wages and rebalance our economy to a point where families can again survive on the wages of one earner. And actually, mainly the left, including people within the trade union movement, in my case, attack you because, you know, you want to tie women to the kitchen sink and all of that sort of nonsense. So, you know, we have to start having these debates. But I absolutely agree. Strong family is hugely important in terms of, you know, creating a more civilised, better functioning society. You know, less crime and problems within society. But combine it with the strong society where we give people decent opportunities in terms of jobs and housing and so on. We don't do the second thing.
And it's not wrong, surely, is it, to point out that some parents are rubbish. I mean, we have kids starting school still wearing nappies, unable to feed themselves. And poverty is blamed. It's not my responsibility. It's the government's fault that my kid is going to school wearing a nappy and not being able to feed itself, not being able to dress itself.
If you want personal...
What's wrong with personal responsibility?
If you want personal responsibility to be at the heart of a society, then you have to embed it at every level of that society. We don't teach children at secondary school how to do things like run a budget in a family, how to be a mother, how to be a father, how to look after children. If you go and do the NCT course for new parents, it's overwhelmingly geared towards the mothers. The fathers are basically absent in the room, and if you're not part of the middle class, typically you can't afford to pay the 300 quid to join a WhatsApp group and everything else. So, yeah, we can talk endlessly about personal responsibility, but if we don't actually embed it at every level of our society, into the education system, into the institutions, so it becomes part of our culture, then we can't sit around and complain about why parents are not taking personal responsibility. And the other thing I would say here is, look at what's happened to people who have pointed to this issue. Take Tony Sewell as an example. He did a big government report a few years ago on disparities among different groups, and he said, well, you know, the dominant narrative is the reason different groups are doing worse than others is because of racism and discrimination, right? And he said, actually, if you look at the rates of family breakdown in some minority communities, they're through the roof. You know, it's 50, 60, 70%. Why can't we talk about that? So there are these taboos within our debate that we're also not allowed to talk about. Yet at the same time, we're asked to buy these very misleading narratives that the reason certain groups are lagging behind others is simply because we are an institutionally racist society. It's a very immature national conversation that we have.
And the biggest myth is that family is a right-wing issue, a right-wing institution, a right-wing topic. Actually, when you look at the whole setup of family, it's the single, and for many people, the main unit of solidarity and of unity and of loyalty and of duty, all of the things that you would think the left ought to, and once upon a time did, believe in, you know, that sense of solidarity and unity. And you know, it's where people learn rules, it's where they understand compassion, it's where they understand obligation and all of that kind of thing. And I've never understood why it is people on my side of politics are so reluctant to discuss. If we are about trying to improve the lot of the most disadvantaged people in society, particularly kids, and we're about equality of opportunity and giving people the chance of having decent outcomes, then why on earth are we reluctant about saying, well, one of the ways to do that is to make sure we create a culture where there are stable families with two parents, where kids can have a safe, secure upbringing, because do you know what? Every study shows that if we're able to give that to them, their life opportunities will be better. And yet we don't want to talk about that on the left, and that's inexcusable.
Exactly, Paul. If you say that, though, you get the sort of stick that James Daly's getting now for saying that very same thing. What is wrong with the family?
I tend to agree with Matt that the language was probably intemperate, and I think he could have phrased it better.
Yeah.
But you know, people run away, and I have to say, by the way, I talk about the left, but it isn't just the left who run away from this topic. Actually, you know, you see people on the Conservative side. Bizarrely, you see people on the Conservative side of politics, whenever there's a national debate around the family, who are very twitchy about it and very uneasy about it. I mean, Matt Hancock gave an interview a couple of months ago where he was asked a question about the importance of, you know, having two parents in a family.
This be the Matt Hancock that left his wife and kids.
Well, yeah,
That
and
one.
you would think that would be something that any normal Conservative would embrace, regardless of his own personal circumstances. But he reacted to the very question with such horror, the fact that somebody could even suggest in a question that, you know, having two parents was probably the best thing for children. He actually called it offensive. I mean, probably on YouTube.
Offensive?
He called it
my
offensive.
Lord.
This is where we're at, where people, even on the Conservative side of politics, are shying away from the debate and actually taking offence at the debate. You know,
Which is
pretty bizarre
ridiculous.
position.
I just want to bring one more thing into this, and that's something the Princess of Wales is turning her attention to at the moment. It's the importance of fathers in children's early years. Now, 90% of single parents in this country are women. Many of them are... this is not mum-shaming, by the way, ladies. This could be... Many of you are working incredibly hard. You're on your own. You're trying to do your best for your kids. This is not mum-shaming. Nearly 4 million children in this country are fatherless. Now, is the Princess of Wales right to concentrate on the role of fathers in a child's upbringing?
Yeah, I think this is a no-brainer. I think, you know, fatherless as a term covers a lot.
Yeah,
I mean,
of course.
there are children that never see their father,
Yeah.
and then there are children who will see their father 2 or 3 times a week. So we need to be, I think, careful with how we use that language. And I mean, let me just reflect a bit on my personal experience. I mean, I think we should be very careful about seeming to blame parents for the outcomes.
Well, this is what
within
the point
their
I'm making
family,
about the
because
mums out
often there
there.
are lots of personal things that happen, and two people fall in love, and sometimes, you know, it just doesn't work out.
Circumstances change.
And we can. I don't want to run into being preachy about family types and formations. Where I do think we need to get to as a society, though, is as Paul says, we've got to take on this taboo. I spoke at the National Conservatism Conference earlier this year, where we had 3 or 4 speakers give really interesting speeches about the effect that family instability has on societies. And if you look at the write-up the day after in, you know, the mainstream newspapers on the left and the right, it was as if, you know, we were back in the 1930s, and people, how could people could talk about the family, and wow, these people are crazy, they must be super religious. And it struck me that this is one of the areas in our debate where, on the one hand, we've got 50 years of research saying this really matters. If you want a return on investment from the state, if you want to save the taxpayer money, then just have strong families. I mean, it's one of the biggest returns on investment. But at the same time, our commentariat, the people who shaped the national conversation, were completely incapable of talking about this. It was as if, you know, we were asking them to sort of reflect on, you know, Loch Ness Monster and say something, you know, cogent and coherent. It was bizarre. And it's a real shame, because it shows how far behind we are compared to other countries around the world that are taking this seriously.
I'm sorry, I think the world's gone mad. I mean, if you are a mum out there on your own, you're struggling to do your best to raise your kids, good luck, you're doing an amazing job. But, you know, there are parents out there who, let's say, don't take responsibility they should do. Right, we have to move on, though. Coming up, it's the last Dewbs & Co of the year. I can't believe... Where's the year gone? So we'll be chatting about New Year's resolutions. Have you made yours yet? Are they a good idea? All that and lots more still to come. Don't go too far.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. This is Dewbs & Co with me, Dawn Neeson, keeping me company until 7 o'clock. Politics professor and pollster Matt Goodwin and trade unionist and broadcaster Paul Embry, both of whom are drinking already. I can't believe it. Where do I get these two from? Now, it is the last Dewbs & Co of the year. Boo. And as we look ahead to... Slow down, boys.
Don't mind us. Crack on.
Yeah, OK, yeah, I'll just give the word, shall I? and as we look ahead to 2024, it's time to start thinking about our New Year's resolutions. But is setting a goal like this a healthy tradition, or can you just put too much pressure on yourself? Obviously, dry January doesn't look like it's happening anytime soon here.
We're still in December. We're still in December.
Yeah, OK, all right. You're sort of like getting it all in beforehand. And this is the point, isn't it? You're getting it all in beforehand. So, Paul, any resolutions? Do you believe in them?
I think they're pretty harmless resolutions, but in my experience, and perhaps I'm looking at it through my own lens, not terribly effective. I think most people...
Oh, yeah? Go on.
Well,
what did you fail miserably at, then?
It's certainly nothing to do with... But I've never had a dry January in my life. Not that I'm a big drinker, but I've never had a dry January or probably not a dry week, actually, for a few years, I wouldn't imagine.
Dry days going it.
I stress again, I'm not a big drinker, but... No, I have made resolutions in the past, like most people have, but they tend to kind of fizzle out after a few weeks. I'm determined this year to do more cooking. I'm ashamed to say that my wife, who's a great cook, does most of the cooking in our house, and I probably need to put my shoulder to the wheel a little bit more. So that's my resolution. But when I come back to the show in, I would guess mid-January, I'm going to admit that I've failed again.
We'll make a point of asking. You wouldn't be alone, though. 88% of us who set New Year's resolutions fail miserably. So how about you, Matt? Any resolutions yet?
I think resolutions are really important. I think when we set goals and we achieve them, I think it just gives us a sense of empowerment. That's what I tell my students anyway. So my New Year's resolution, I'll tell you what it is. So for the political anoraks watching, 2024 is going to be enormous. We've got US election, UK election, European Parliament elections, elections in India, a so-called election in Russia. So my resolution, because I'm obsessed with politics, is to make sure I plan a few breaks between those elections and have a bit more relax and recovery time between analysing all of those elections.
Have you made your predictions on any of those elections yet? Because I know you go big on predictions, don't you?
Labour government.
Yeah. America?
President Trump 2.
Oh, controversial.
Big right-wing shift in Europe. Those are my 3 predictions.
Wow.
I think you could be right.
Yeah, absolutely. But, I mean, if we do resolutions in small baby steps, and it doesn't sound like yours is going to be very successful, then it's OK. But people put this huge pressure on themselves. It's not just, I'm going to jog around the block. It's, I'm going to run a marathon by the end of January.
True.
Yeah, I mean, you have to. Yeah, I think any expert would say you have to make it achievable. Achievable in instalments if necessary. And it's like dieting, isn't it? If you decide you want to lose weight, but you go on a crash diet and you deny yourself all privileges and all luxuries, then I think the evidence probably shows that you're more likely to fail than somebody who says, I'll allow myself, the occasional luxury and whatever, but I'll do this gradually and more likely, therefore, to be successful.
I think the worst thing is when your other half makes a resolution, and it's like, if you're living with someone who goes on dry January, and you think, I'm not having a glass of wine.
That's grounds for divorce, surely.
Right? Yeah. Come back in January and tell me how the cooking's gone, won't you? Because and the lovely Mrs. Embry and how well she's doing. So I think that's pretty much it for the year, isn't it, for us? I think
big year next year.
It's been an eventful year for everybody, hasn't it? And it's been a tough year for a lot of people.
It really has.
I won't go too much into what's coming up at 9 o'clock with Patrick, but I can tell you on the polling side, there is one issue. When you ask people, what do you really want the government to prioritise next year, there's one issue that stands out above all others, and you'll have to tune into Patrick's show to figure out, but it's to do with how difficult 23's been for a lot of people.
I have to say goodbye now. Matt and Paul, you've been brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm back on Monday with more Dewbs. But in the meantime, have a lovely weekend. Up next is Lee Anderson. And for us, from all of us to all of you, have a very happy new year. And I'll see you on Monday on the other side. Not too much of this, honestly. Cheers, everybody. Thank you.
Cheers.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, I'm Alex Burkill. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast. There will be some frost around tonight before wet and windy weather arrives in time for the weekend. That's in association with a deep area of low pressure currently out in the Atlantic. This will sweep its way in across the UK as we go through the next 24 hours or so. Ahead of that, some quieter weather for a time as many of the daytime showers ease and clear away, leaving some clear skies for many, but a very wet and windy picture towards the far northeast of Scotland tonight. Under the clear skies, particularly towards eastern parts, likely to turn quite chilly, a touch of frost in the south, a widespread harsh frost across parts of Scotland. So a bit of a frosty start first thing on Saturday morning, but then turning increasingly wet and windy as this system makes its way in, pushing northeastwards as we go through the day. As that rain hits the cold air over Scotland, we are likely to see some significant snow, could see more than 10 centimetres in some places over the higher ground, could cause some travel disruption here. Elsewhere, an unsettled picture, but quite mild towards the south, highs of around 12 Celsius. Looking ahead towards New Year's Eve, and for many it is going to be a blustery day. Strongest winds towards the south, risk of gales here. Quite a few showers around, but a calmer picture across Scotland. Some dry weather here and mostly light winds, though again towards the far northeast it is looking wet and windy. As we go into the beginning of the new year, it actually looks like it will be largely dry, but that may not last that long. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Put in your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
So welcome to another brilliant show. We're back here at the Golden Diamond Club here in Ashfield, the award-winning Golden Diamond. And we've got a very special guest on tonight. That's former Cabinet Minister Edwina Currie. Also, our lefts at the bar are Matthew Larzer. He's up in Ashfield again. We've got Lisa McKenzie and trade unionist Andy MacDonald. And Emily Barley will tell her heartbreaking story about the loss of her child at Barnsley Hospital. But first, let's go to the news.
Good evening, I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Poland says a Russian missile likely entered its airspace. According to the head of the Polish armed forces, both Poland and NATO's radar systems spotted an unidentified aerial object over the country's territory.